Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Intro to Tech Equity webinar. We'll get started in a few minutes just as we wait for any late arrivals to attend. So just hang in there and we'll get started in about 3 minutes. Hey, everyone. Thanks for those of you who are joining in. We'll get started soon in a couple of minutes. So just hang tight. Hello, everyone. Looks like we have enough people in the room to get started. I want to thank you all for joining us today for our Intro to Tech Equity webinar. I hope you all can hear and see me. My name is Herman Calderon. I'm the community manager at TechEquity Collaborative, and in my role, I get to engage with our supporters through some of our volunteer opportunities, campaigns that we run, and presentations such as these. So I get to engage with you all here. So feel free to drop in any questions you have into the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen, but we won't answer any questions until the end. So a little bit about what we'll cover today. We're going to take a quick poll shortly after this slide just to gauge where everyone's at. We'll talk about why Tech Equity exists as an organization and how we got started. We'll talk about the key issues we've identified to help us understand the problems that need to be solved. And we'll talk about how we can take action to address our region's most pressing economic issues. So we're going to start off with a poll. I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll. Should be pretty quick. We'll wait 30 seconds. Just how familiar you are with Tech Equity. Is this your first time hearing about us? And then how much do you know about housing and labor issues in the Bay Area? So we'll just wait a couple seconds here. Great. It looks like everyone has voted, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. So let's talk about why we're here. Well, Tech Equity got started because some of its earliest founders and members saw the symptoms of growing inequity within their neighborhoods, and they understood that there was a perception that tech and tech workers were the cause of the problem. So they noticed things such as rising rents, displacement, traffic, and increases in people experiencing homelessness. And as they talked to others, they realized that they weren't alone in their concerns, and that they, as tech workers, were uniquely positioned to help contribute to solutions to these issues. Especially now in the face of the pandemic, we're seeing that the affordability crisis gets so much worse with an increased burden on low income communities and communities of color. And many of our neighbors are uncertain as to how they'll continue to manage what was already an untenable situation. And at the same time, tech workers have remained relatively unscathed. So the pandemic really has the potential to even further exacerbate inequality that our region was already facing. So this is the state of our housing crisis in the Bay Area. I think the fact that rents are rising isn't really a surprise to anyone on this call because we already all know and we feel this. And while some Californians are very successful in the tech driven economy here, the average salaries for tenants have actually decreased slightly throughout the years. And it's really a sharp contrast with the narrative of tech success. And without tech at the table working together to address our shared crisis, it's understandable as to why community members are frustrated. So just before the pandemic hit, unemployment was hovering around 4%, and people were already struggling to make ends meet. And since the virus hit, 1.6 million Californians have filed for unemployment. Now, keep in mind, this graph is just goes up to April 1st of 2020. So this is probably even more higher than the numbers that are on here. And so, meanwhile, experts are believing that it's not likely that rents are going to fall much during this economic downturn. Rents may go down eventually, but are more likely to flatline, and people's incomes won't rebound quickly enough, so renters will be in a worse position overall. And as instability and uncertainty continues, we'll see more of our neighbors being pushed into homelessness or worse. Communities are frustrated, and considering the graph we just looked at, it really comes to no surprise. I know for myself, I've grown up in the Bay Area my whole life, and I've been able to see both sides of the coin. I have friends and family who are worried about the changes they're seeing in the community and what that means for them, but also have friends and family who have pursued jobs within the tech industry and they've been able to find lots of success for themselves and for their families and for their community. However, we see that when tech shoulders the blame for our region's issues, it starts to create an us versus them dynamic, further dividing our community. We know that tech workers care and that they want to help and that they don't want to be contributing to this deepening divide within our region. While we're all unsure as to how long we'll be managing this new normal caused by the pandemic, it's important to note, as I mentioned before, that many within the tech sector remain relatively unscathed. And more than most other sectors, tech has been able to make the transition to working from home with little disruption. And now more than ever, tech workers and tech companies have an opportunity to support more equitable solutions in our communities. And we have an opportunity to use our unique uh, positions of privilege to support our neighbors, but it can be hard to know how to best engage in a time of such uncertainty. Because of our affordability crisis, which is now compounded by the pandemic, we're at risk of losing so many critical components in our community that make the Bay Area a hub of diversity and innovation. Over the last few decades, housing costs have skyrocketed due in part to limited supply. The housing crisis was already incredibly challenging for many families prior to the pandemic. And now, as thousands are filing for unemployment weekly, already unaffordable rents are impossible to meet. And as a result, we've seen longtime residents being forced out, and we've seen how difficult it is for lower and middle income people to live near their jobs. So while some workers are finding success, many others are struggling to make ends meet. And families were already challenged by the status quo are now finding themselves unable to weather this new crisis. But we don't think that it has to be this way. At Tech Equity Collaborative, we're as optimistic as ever about the tech industry's potential to drive broad-based growth that's accessible to everyone, but it's clear that it won't happen on its own. We can make it out of this crisis together, better, stronger than we were before, but only if we're investing in the people and the institutions that are serving our communities. We have to show up, and we have to do so in partnership with those in the community that are feeling the most pain if we're to dismantle this notion that tech is the enemy. At Tech Equity, we believe that a more engaged tech sector is a more ethical tech sector, that connecting tech workers and companies to issues where they live in will result in more ethical decisions at work and more engagement within our communities. And we know we can do this, and the first step is to show up. And you all have done a great first step by signing on to this webinar and joining in on the discussion today. So our goal is to change the conditions in which the tech sector is growing. We believe that effective structural change will eliminate a culture and policies that have institutionalized inequity, leading to stronger and more resilient communities. So we help tech workers approach these big problems and engage in system change in three major ways. So our programs educate you about the most critical civic issues where you live. And we host book club discussions, panel discussions with experts, webinars such as these. We publish voter guides during election season. We activate you on a public policy agenda that results in a more inclusive economy in your community through voter turnout, signature gathering, and lobbying that we participate in. And finally, we connect you on a personal level to the community you live in and the people who live there outside of your tech bubble through our programming and campaigns that we support. The good news is that members of Tech Equity are showing up for the community. Tech workers are members of the community and should be at the table working alongside non-tech community members. Together, we can advocate for solutions to our region's most pressing shared problems. The pandemic has shown us that the health of our community really depends on all of us, and we have to work together to address these underlying issues that are driving inequity within our economy. So at Tech Equity, our two key issue areas are housing and workforce and labor. So while housing costs are a core part of this, the issues really are intertwined and intersect because where you live affects your access to opportunity, and what job you have affects where you're able to afford to live. So our goal at Tech Equity is bold, comprehensive change by companies and government that's led by the tech workforce. And these issues have only gotten even more urgent during this pandemic, and we're all well positioned to adapt our agenda to these new realities. So let's learn a little bit more about inequity within our neighborhoods. So this affordability crisis really is decades in the making. The policy choices that we've made over the course of decades have set us up for this level of pain that our community is feeling now, and especially now during the pandemic. So in the 1930s, the federal government instituted a policy that's still felt today, especially by communities of color in the Bay Area, and that policy is redlining. So redlining was a process in which the Homeowners Loan Corporation, a federal agency, gave neighborhoods ratings to guide investment. So the policy is so named for the red or hazardous neighborhoods that were deemed riskiest. So on maps, those neighborhoods were literally redlined, as we can see with the image on the screen. And those communities that were deemed risky investments or redlined didn't receive any investment. And these neighborhoods were predominantly home to communities of color, and that really is by no accident. The hazardous rating was in large part based on racial demographics. So, in other words, redlining was a discriminatory policy and a racist policy. And it made it hard for residents to get loans for home ownership or for maintenance of their homes for something like building a new roof. And consequently, redlining led to cycles of disinvestment, including development and production within these neighborhoods. So there's a terrible history of underinvestment, underbuilding, and exclusion in the Bay Area. And often those communities that have been historically underinvested in and have been redlined are the very same communities that are at risk of gentrification today. So the crisis we're living in is decades in the making, way before tech came to the Bay Area. And it's not unique to the Bay Area. There are many cases of redlining all throughout the Bay, all throughout California, and all throughout the United States. So by preventing entire neighborhoods from being able to access capital, these neighborhoods were unable to build the schools that they needed, all the small businesses, and a community that fostered economic success and opportunity. And it caused many of the people who lived within these red line neighborhoods for generations to fall in and stay in liquid asset poverty. Now, you may be asking yourselves, what is liquid asset poverty? Well, someone is considered to be in liquid asset poverty if they don't have enough savings to cover their basic expenses for 3 months after experiencing an income shock. And an income shock can be like a huge rent increase, a sudden loss of a job, a pandemic, things like that. And it impacts almost 1 out of 2 Californians. So 46% of Californians are in liquid asset poverty, and people of color and lower income people are affected at much higher rates. So 67% of Latino households are in liquid asset poverty, and 63% of African American households are in liquid asset poverty. And there really isn't a single reason as to why this is happening, but Many years of policy decisions have led to these outcomes, which are especially burdensome for communities of color. And these policy decisions often predate tech's arrival, but tech workers can now take a role in supporting better policies moving forward. The twin forces of a housing shortage, particularly with affordable housing and wages that are not covering the cost of living, have created a regional crisis that has hindered opportunity, growth, and prosperity for families and small businesses alike. And as you can imagine, these statistics will likely be impacted by the outcomes of the pandemic. Many people in our communities were already struggling, and with unemployment on a steep rise and city and state budgets that are being depleted by emergency response efforts, many of our neighbors are facing increased instability and likely will for years to come if we don't implement the necessary solutions now. So the cost of living here were already high. So let's take a look at how a worker earning minimum wage fares in the current rental market. So this is what it takes to be able to afford an average two-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. So if you're making $120,000 a year, you can afford the average two-bedroom apartment working a regular 8-hour day, 8-hour shift. However, if you're making minimum wage in San Francisco, you need to work 30 hours a day to be able to afford that two-bedroom. So there's only 24 hours in a day. So we're setting up an impossible situation for low wage workers to be able to afford living in the city where they work. And just to keep it in context, it's not just people outside the tech sector that are struggling to afford San Francisco. There's a common misconception that all tech workers are paid these lavish salaries. However, not every salaried employee is making six figures. Some salaried tech employees, like those in customer success or marketing, are paid salaries that are still considered to be low income within the Bay Area. And even further away from this image of a wealthy tech worker are the thousands of contractors and contingent workers like security guards, custodians, bus drivers, cooks, who are working long hours to maintain tech companies, but are receiving minimum benefits and are not paid as much. So you have to have a good salary to afford your apartment. But why is your apartment so expensive to begin with? Well, rents are going up due in part to lack of supply. And this chart is showing us what we should be building. So the state sets goals for how much housing local communities should build to keep up with demand and population growth. And these are called RHNA goals, RHNA goals, and that stands for Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So as you can see, we're doing a pretty good job at meeting our RHNA goal for the above moderate income housing bracket. So that's all that big bar all the way on the right. And that's affordable to people making that good salary we just talked about earlier. But we're not building anywhere close enough housing for lower and moderate income people. And those are the brackets on the left side. And as housing costs have skyrocketed with production of affordable housing not being matched, working class residents and communities of color have been driven out of our urban core and pushed into the outer edges of our region, further away from job centers and supportive services. And some residents have been displaced from the region altogether. So remember when someone tells you that we just need to build more housing, it's important that we ask them, build more housing for whom? Again, we're not building enough housing at lower levels of affordability. And because we're not building enough housing that's affordable for lower and middle income people, they're leaving our communities while high income folks are coming in and staying in. So for every high income person coming into the Bay Area, a low income person is being pushed out at about a 1-to-1 ratio. So displacement really is driven by policy choices. And we may see this ratio of displacement continue to rise as the pandemic continues to progress. And the folks who are the most rent burdened are in low wage jobs, and low wage jobs are getting hit the hardest by this crisis. And we can't build our way out to solve our problems, but it is true that we don't have enough homes for people. So as you can see, the affordability crisis we're living out today is a result of bad policy choices. And the good news is that we can make a different set of choices moving forward. So at TechEquity, we envision a world where a growing tech-driven economy creates opportunity for everyone, and where tech sector employees and companies are engaged and active participants in making our communities better places to live. So we've identified structural changes that need to happen in order to achieve this vision, but we won't be able to achieve this without the necessary policy change. So here's what we've identified in the housing world. I'm going to give a brief overview of these, but I'm happy to take any questions at the end. So we need to take an above all approach to tackling our housing affordability crisis, and that starts with production, preservation, and protection. So production. We need to make sure that we're building more housing, specifically at lower levels of affordability. And we can do this through zoning and permitting reform that brings down the cost of constructing housing by removing delays and lengthy administrative processes that make it too expensive to build homes. Preservation. We need to make sure that we're providing more resources to subsidize and maintain and improve existing affordable housing. And finally, protection. We need to protect existing tenants from displacement. So it's going to take a long time to build the housing that we need, but in the meantime, we need to protect existing tenants from being displaced. Especially now, we need to be thinking about short and long-term solutions to preservation and protection. Many of our neighbors are now more at risk than ever before, and an economic downturn is also an ideal time to lean heavily into producing more affordable housing, as the cost of labor, materials, and land may decrease slightly within the current market conditions. We also need to make sure that we all get enough compensation and benefits to live a healthy and stable life. So we want to ensure that companies are doing their part to contribute to the communities they exist within, that the people in the surrounding communities are able to access these jobs, and that these jobs are paying fair wages and benefits, regardless of the role they're in. So we were excited to see many tech companies step up and commit to continue paying their contingent workers as offices closed during the pandemic. But we need to ensure that that same care and thoughtfulness goes into supporting these workers well beyond the pandemic. So we need to make sure that there are equitable on-ramps. There needs to be more access to good paying, high opportunity jobs. We need corporate responsibility. Companies need to be conscious of their impact in their communities and need to work with community leaders and organizations to ensure that their economic success benefits their neighbors as well. And finally, we need to make sure that all jobs are good jobs. We need to make sure that contractors and contingent workers are treated fairly. So we're going to take a break here and launch another poll. So it's similar questions. Just how familiar, again, are you with tech equity after listening to the first bit of the presentation, and how much do you feel like you learned about housing and labor here in the Bay Area now that you've got a little bit of background? So we'll just take 15, 20 seconds, see how people are feeling now. Cool, so we'll just wait a couple more seconds as people are filling in their votes. Great, sounds good. Thank you everyone for that. So once again, there's tons of ways for you to get involved with Tech Equity. We host tons of educational events. So we have monthly event series where you can sign on to our events to go deeper on some of the issues we discussed today. So we're having a What Will the Biden Administration Do series. What will the Biden administration do for housing, and what will the Biden administration do for labor? So the housing one is next week on Thursday from 12 to 1 p.m. And the labor one is exactly a week after that one at the end of January. And we also have a panel discussion on tech and labor unions with the announcement that Google employees were unionizing. So we'll have that event if you're interested coming up in February. And if you're interested in advocacy, you can volunteer to support one of our campaigns that we're going to be working on this year. And the final way you can engage with us is through engaging with your community. So we connect tech workers with non-tech community members through some of our civic tech projects. So if you're a designer, engineer, or just have any technical skills that you'd like to donate, we have projects coming up this year where you can donate a couple hours a week for something that helps out the community. Or you can sign up for our community conversation campaigns, which is something new that we're launching this year, where we'll be setting up calls with our base, some of our supporters, and to further talk about the issues we talked about today, more of on a one-to-one basis where people can ask questions. You can meet our staff, build a relationship with our staff, and just get pointed in the right direction of how you want to participate in any of our engagements. And so this is how we work. We try to make it as easy and as accessible as possible to plug in and build community in the process of doing so. And so what can you do today? So you can do three things right after you get off this call. You can become a member. So we have membership available for $10 a month or $100 a year. You can take action on one of our campaigns. So I'll give examples of some of the campaigns we've worked on in the past right after this slide. Or as I mentioned, you can sign up for our community conversation series. Once again, you get a chance to hop on a call with TechEquity staff like myself, our director of advocacy or senior vice president of advocacy and organizing, and you'll get to ask any questions you may have, further talk about the issues, and really get to know us on a more personal level. So the first campaign that we participated in just last year was the Yes on Prop 15 campaign, also known as Schools and Communities First. So our coalition, Schools and Communities First, successfully had submitted 1.7 million signatures to qualify this ballot initiative last year. So our volunteers helped us collect signatures, and the measure was all about bringing $12 billion to our schools and communities by closing a corporate tax loophole and making sure that corporations pay their fair share in property taxes. So unfortunately, the proposition did not pass. It was a statewide ballot, but our volunteers did amazing work. We collected signatures, we phone banked every week. We got to collect hundreds of signatures, and we called thousands of voters. So it was a really great experience and something very important that happened last year. We also have the Fair Chance at Housing campaign, which is banning the box in Alameda County. So this campaign is all about helping remove barriers for formerly incarcerated people to have more access to housing after being released from prison. So we successfully had ordinances passed in Oakland in partnership with the organization Just Cities and in Berkeley last year. So if you're interested in this campaign, you can sign up to donate and support these efforts as they continue to expand these protections throughout the entirety of Alameda County and beyond. And the last campaign we have actually happened in 2019, but it really highlights the work that we do at TechEquity. So it's the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, and it highlights how we partner with community organizations and center the needs of people who are feeling the pain of the affordability crisis more acutely than those of us in tech. So working alongside community members, legislators, and relevant stakeholders, we were able to identify a new policy intervention that could protect more renters than any law before in California history. And that policy would prevent tenants from arbitrary and unjust evictions by requiring landlords to have a good cause for evicting a tenant. And it also prevented unfair rent increases and prevented price gouging by capping rent increases at no more than 10%. So as a result of our strong coalition, we were able to introduce the bill to the California legislature, and that was signed into law in October of 2019. And so now the Tenant Protection Act extends protections to over 8 million California renters. But passing the law on its own wasn't enough for us at TechEquity. We wanted to ensure that tenants knew their rights and could advocate for themselves. So we reached out to our TechEquity volunteers who donated their time and their skills to create a website that would help tenants navigate their rights under this new law. So that website is live. It's been live since 2019. It's called tenantprotections.org, and it's already been used by thousands of California renters. So if you yourself rent, if you know someone who rents that might benefit from this tool, once again, it's tenantprotections.org. So as I mentioned earlier, you can do three things right after you get off this call. You can sign up for our community conversation calls. You can take action on one of our campaigns or become a civic tech volunteer, or you can become a member. The Bay Area's tech economy has only been working for some, as we talked about. And while there are great opportunities for people to find success here, many people around us are struggling to just make ends meet. And as I mentioned, I've grown up in the Bay Area my whole life, and I've seen firsthand how the unaffordability crisis paired with the tech boom has worked for some, but not for all. I have family who pursued jobs within tech, found lots of success, but also friends and family who are coming back from college and can't afford to move out of their parents' homes, can't find a job, and are just struggling. And so the Bay Area has the potential to be a ground where tech workers and community members are working side by side to bring equity to all and for everyone in our region. And through policy agendas, civic engagement, active participation in our communities, we have an opportunity to create the neighborhoods we've always envisioned to live in. And we need to act now because our affordability crisis doesn't wait for anyone, and it impacts all aspects of our lives, from our housing to our families to our jobs. So, in order to make the Bay Area a place that brings opportunity and prosperity for everyone, that means that we all need to pitch in. So at Tech Equity, we're at it every day, bringing forth the policies that protect renters, that build more housing, and create more access to high paying opportunity jobs. And so you can join Tech Equity, as I mentioned, as a member for $10 a month or $100 a year to bring your voice to the table and change our community. You can sign up to volunteer and engage with us on some of our campaigns, or you can just sign up for a community conversation and just get to talk about these issues further. So the pandemic really has exposed us to how deep the cracks within our economy and our communities run. And when cities are setting aside issues like housing and fair labor conditions, it really deepens the inequity and leaves us vulnerable for things like future recessions, pandemics, and more. And because we've overlooked these issues in the Bay Area, it could set us back years in terms of recovery. So if you take one thing away from this experience and this webinar, this call, we hope that it's the realization that more equity within our communities actually strengthens our economy and safeguards us from a future recession. So we'll hope you'll join us in advocating for a future that works for everyone. I'm sure that was quite a bit of information. So if anyone has any quick questions, I'll be happy to answer them right now. I'll be sharing the slide deck and a recording of this webinar afterwards. So we'll send out a follow-up email to you all that are on this call. But I'll be happy to take any questions if you all have any. So we have a question, how do we sign up to volunteer? So if you're interested in any of the campaigns I talked about, or just a certain type of engagement that you're looking for, you can just reply back to the follow-up email and I'll point you in the right direction. Right now, we don't have sign-up sheets for specific campaigns, as the California legislator is just about to open up session and we're still working on what bills we want to prioritize. So we'll have more specific volunteer opportunities available, but just by replying to that email and saying, hey, I want to participate more in civic tech projects, or I want to participate more in campaign work, just let me know and I can keep you in the loop of where to go. Any other questions? Cool. So I'm not seeing any other questions. So I want to thank everyone for your time. We hope you feel inspired to join our growing movement. If you think of any other questions, last minute questions, please reply back to that follow-up email. We'll get back to you. And just keep an eye out. Once again, it'll have the presentation, it'll have the recording, and it'll have more information on the community conversation. So I want to just thank you all for your time and hope to see you at future events or future engagements. Thank you, everyone.